continues.
Congressional Republicans released their budget resolutions last week and are looking to move them through their respective chambers this week for a response to the priorities laid out in those budget blueprints. We turn to six-term Congresswoman and Democratic member of the Budget Committee, Wisconsin Congresswoman Gwen Moore. Congresswoman, first, how would you describe the priorities of the GOP budget plans that were released last week?
Well, I can tell you that I think their priorities really are to shift the largesse of the country to the top 1%. And I'm not saying that in any kind of anecdotal way. When you look at their budget priorities, literally, there are over $5 trillion in cuts. 69% of those cuts are to the poorest and most vulnerable in our society, to children. The other cuts are aimed at cutting infrastructure, investments in research and development, health care, and all of the benefits inure to the top 1%, with tax cuts and spending through the tax code. It is really a really egregious budget, and in addition to that, there are a couple of versions of their budget which really increase military spending above and beyond what the generals and the president have asked for.
If those are the priorities you see in the Republican budgets that were released last week, what are the priorities of the Democratic budget blueprints?
Oh, the priority of not only the Democratic budget as an alternative, but the progressive budget, the Congressional Black Caucus budget, really to end the sequester, to pay for the sequester, to make investments in students and education, to make investments in transportation, infrastructure, and to really end some of the more onerous and egregious corporate welfare benefits through the tax code.
Here's one of the headlines from the Republican budgets that were released last week. This from the Wall Street Journal. House GOP outlines a plan to end deficits. House Republicans unveiled a budget proposal last week that they said would eliminate federal budgets within 10 years, largely by overhauling Medicare, Medicaid, and other social safety net programs. Is a balanced budget a priority for Democrats?
Well, I can tell you that, of course, everybody would love to have a balanced budget, but the so-called balanced budget of the Republicans really relies on gimmicks, tricks. They, for example, add an additional $32 billion to what's called the OCO fund, the overseas account, so that they can move around budgetary controls to provide even more money to the military. And, of course, they say they save Medicare and provide more flexibility to the states by reducing benefits for Medicare and by block granting monies to for Medicaid, which really amounts to a first-come, first-serve program, so that even if you're eligible for Medicaid, if you're in a nursing home, once the state monies run out, then you're out of luck.
You mentioned a few Democratic budget alternatives that you were talking through. Here's a comparison on spending in the president's White House budget proposal, the line on spending compared to the House Republican budget plan, seeing a drop in trillions of dollars of spending over the next 10 years or so. Do any of the budgets that you're talking about ever foresee a balanced budget down the road, 10, 15 years out?
You know, we have had deficit spending in this country from the beginning of time, really. And it has not diminished our ability to have the world's strongest currency, diminished our ability to pay our debts. And again, a balanced budget is a trick. The balanced budget doesn't allow the country the flexibility to respond to emergencies, to respond to the needs that states might have. And the Republicans don't have a balanced budget either. So I wouldn't say that the alternative budgets have deficit spending. but neither does the Republican budget. It's just a matter of priorities. Our budgets don't balance the budget on the backs of children and babies and critical infrastructure improvements and economic development, whereas they don't have a balanced budget either, and they prioritize military spending and providing tax cuts to people who earn over $200,000 a year. You know, I am on the Financial Services Committee in addition to the Budget Committee, and I've had a lot of conversations with Janet Yellen, our Fed chair, and she, like other Fed chairs, have warned about the inequality that persists in our budgeting strategy. Is very, very dangerous for our economy to have this kind of equality, and the Republican budget continues that trend.
We're talking with Congresswoman Gwen Moore, Democrat from Wisconsin, as we said, a senior member of the Budget Committee. With your questions and comments for her, you can call in. Democrats at 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. We'll start with Zameh, who's waiting in Bowie, Maryland, line for Democrats. Zameh, good morning.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to commend you, Representative Moore, for all that you're trying to do for the middle class, the poor, the senior citizens. I watched the Budget Committee hearings or meeting, whatever it was, last week on C-SPAN, and I was appalled at how the Republican members showed such disdain for the amendments that you and your Democrat colleagues were trying to present to help the middle class, the poor, and the elderly. I had to stop watching it. I burst into tears. It's just appalling. They do not care about the American people. And I just want to commend you, your colleagues, and the President of the United States for what you all are trying to do for us. Keep up the good work. Keep the faith. And I really appreciate you, and I thank you. Wisconsin is they just don't know. They have an excellent representative. And thank you again.
And thank you, Zameh.
Let's go to Al, Cambridge, Ohio, line for Independents. Al, good morning.
Hi, John. I had a question for C-SPAN first, and just a statement or something to ponder, and then a question for the congressperson. Sure. On C-SPAN, I'm looking at your front page, and on the right-hand side, you've got users. Recently posted videos from users, and I looked up some of those users, and a lot of those users appear to be employees of C-SPAN. Now, my question for the congressperson is, how are we ever going to be able to get this military budget down to an acceptable level that doesn't threaten other people in the world with our military might? And how are we going to be able to manage our country when we impoverish our lowest citizens with these onerous taxes? And I'll take my comments off the air. If I look at our history of our taxes, we started out just taxing people that were making about what the equivalent was of about $400,000. And now we pushed it down. These people at the bottom aren't seeing any benefits. Thank you.
And Al, I'll take your first question and let the Congresswoman answer. I know I use our website all the time, an interactive feature on making clips of interesting moments on the House floor. You can sign up and log in and create your own clips as well. It's a very easy to use interactive website, so feel free to use it yourself, become a user of C-SPAN. We encourage you and all our viewers to do that. But Congresswoman Moore, I'll let you take his other question.
Well, thank you for calling, Al. You know, I hope that I understand your question. Really, we do have a tax system that is very regressive. And as a Democrat, I think that the Republican budget proposal makes it even more regressive. As I mentioned earlier, you know, economists, folk like our Federal Reserve Chairwoman, Janet Yellen, are very, very concerned about inequality because you hear so much rhetoric about the so-called job creators. Job creators really are the middle class. They're people that go out and spend. They buy new cars. They buy toys for their kids at Christmas time. They take vacations. They buy boats. They buy clothing. They pay for tuitions. And when you really squeeze the middle class so hard, tax them, burden them, we've projected that it would cost the average someone making 50 grand a year an additional $2,000 in taxes to provide tax breaks, to lower the tax rate to 25% and provide more tax breaks to the top 1% would cost the average family an additional $2,000 a year in tax. That decreases the ability for our economy to work. And so I agree with you that we need a fairer tax system, one that's more progressive, that really spreads the wealth. When we look at our current tax, our so-called recovery, most of that benefit has inured to people at the top. And indeed, we spend $1 trillion a year through the tax code to benefit people who are, to corporations and people who are very, very wealthy. So while we're talking about cutting trillions of dollars of benefits from poor people, sick people, elderly people, children, cutting Pell Grants for kids who are trying to become educated, we're still spending $1 trillion a year on literally corporate welfare giveaways through the tax code.
Straight Think on Twitter has a question for you. Outside of typical partisan rhetoric, what is your single greatest challenge in creating an efficient and effective budget?
I think the biggest challenge to creating an efficient and effective budget is to really sort of put everything on the table and have no sacred cows. And to really say that, we're not going to come to the table with the notion that we can't take one thin dime away from the wealthiest people. If you come to the table with that narrow-mindedness, then it's hard to put a budget together. On the other end, if you don't look for waste from some of the programs that we have, and if you don't bring that to the table, I think that, again, you're in a no-win situation. I think it's really important to come to the table and look and have no sacred cows.
Well, it brings up the question of why are budgets important? This isn't the actual appropriations process. We'll get into that later this year. And budget projections change each year. So why are budgets important?
Budgets are important because they are an expression of your values. So we see very clearly from the kinds of budgets that are being proposed from various factions in the Republican Party, various factions in the Democratic Party, what people's priorities are. We have, for example, the chairperson of our budget committee, Mr. Price, bringing two budgets to the table. One sponsored by the deficit hawks, people who say, we don't care who has to suffer. We just want something that looks like a balanced budget, and we want increased war spending. And another one that says we want yet even more war spending. And that's a priority. When you say we want more war spending and it doesn't matter if we have to cut sick people off, cut kids off, then that's a statement of your values. The Democratic alternative, the Congressional Black Caucus, alternative, the Progressive Caucus, they say we need to grow the economy. We need to make sure that there are good family supporting jobs. And so that if we have to take a nick from the wealthiest people and have them provide more revenue, let's do that. That's worth it in order to have transportation funding, in order to make sure that we lower the cost of tuition for students, that it is worth it to say to someone who makes $250,000, $400,000 a year that we want you to contribute more. We are willing as Democrats to say that we're going to ratchet down an overbloated military in order to make sure that we have retirement security for Americans. those are statements of priorities. There is no legal enforcement of a budget. It's a statement of priorities.
Let's go to Ruckersville, Virginia. Roger is waiting, line for independence. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning. Boy, you said so much this morning about this process, and my question is, with the national debt having increased as much as it has, isn't that limiting the flexibility that we actually have in setting the budget? Because the first item on that budget is the interest that we have to pay.
Well, I mean, you make a very excellent point. I mean, debt is not a good thing, but you know, you don't balance a budget on the backs of the poorest people. As I mentioned earlier, you know, our economy is 70% of our economy is consumer driven. So that when you find stores like one of my favorite stores, you know, that sells electronic products and so on, you know, last Christmas didn't make their bottom line, is because people don't have the money to spend. So that when you know, you take something like SNAP or food stamps, which people relied upon during the recession. You know, if you have a Republican budget that looks at cutting $125 billion through this budget window from food stamps, you're actually taking money out of the economy. For every dollar of food stamps, it provides $1.7 of benefit to our economy. I mean, because there are merchants that benefit from it, there are farmers that benefit from it, from those expenditures. You just take that money away and people don't have it to spend. What people really need to understand, they need to shift their thinking. You know, I am not fond of comparing our national budget to a family budget, but Republicans do it all the time. So let me do it. In a family budget, people they carry debt. They have a mortgage on their house. They don't just go out and pay, you know, $200,000 for a house. People don't go out and pay $20,000 for a car. They have debt. They don't say, well, gee, I'm going to take all the resources of the family and go buy a house, and in the meantime, we're not going to feed the kids. That's not how budgets work. So debt is a feature of our economy, and it needs to be managed better. But you know, there's a break-even point in terms of the benefit of just stripping all of the economic activity out of it. You don't balance the budget not only on the backs of the poorest, but you also don't balance the budget and forego investments in transportation and in research and development and building up our crumbling infrastructure.
Let's head up to Michigan, where David's been waiting on our line for Democrats. David, you're on with Congresswoman Moore.
Good morning, Congresswoman. I'm sorry, Moore. Could say multiple things, all these military things, like watch the news pretty readily, but I'll just break it down to real simple. The last 40 years, it seems as if the Republicans have decided to vilify the federal government and try to get monies back to the states and call it the nanny state, et cetera. And I think that, you know, you have 50 different institutions versus one that manages things and keeps the cronyism and nepotism down. The states spend money just as bad as the federal government, or, you know, inefficiently. I'm from a state that the governor actually was smart. He's a Republican. Took the Medicaid expansion as for the Affordable Care Act. That's another issue I could talk about for all day long, because I work in healthcare, and we had no solutions before the Affordable Care Act to stop, you know, indigent care and not, or channel it to proper, you know, places like tertiary care and things. But I wanted to know your opinion on should the states be I thought we fought the Civil War to decide where the federal power resides, but apparently the last 40 years that's changed hands, and I think the states are more corrupt than the federal government, or actually potential for corruption. What's your opinion?
And Congresswoman, as you're answering, I'll show that chart again on which states have taken up that Medicaid expansion that the viewer was referring to. The dark blue states here, including Michigan, where the caller was calling from, one of those states that have decided to expand Medicaid. The states in white here, states that have not expanded Medicaid, Wisconsin being one of those.
Yeah. And, you know, it has really it's put us in a deficit situation, David, for the state of Wisconsin, for example, to not have taken up the Medicaid expansion. You know, I was on the finance committee when I was in the state legislature, and, you know, our Medicaid program, the federal government provided 60 cents for every dollar we spent on poor, sick, elderly people. The Medicaid expansion would have provided 100% of the Medicaid dollars for 3 years, and then after that, 90 cents. I mean, you don't need to be a math genius to figure that out. And so it cost our state over $200 million for the political benefit of our governor, Scott Walker, to be able to bash the federal government and bash spending. So literally, we are paying that 60 cents on a dollar out of state funds for Medicaid rather than having the Medicaid expansion. You know, David, you really raised an important point about the structure of our government. We do have a republic, and there is a federalism where things are delegated to the states. But I just really do have to remind you and agree with you, David, that you know, that the so-called states' rights argument, sending things back to the state, really is a proxy for many things, up to and including racism. When we on the Budget Committee talk, for example, about giving the states more flexibility with Medicaid, giving the states more flexibility with food stamps, what they're really talking about is ending the entitlement to these programs, and block granting, giving a sum sufficient amount of money to the states. Really major cuts in these programs, so that even if you're eligible, even if you're an elderly man or woman needing nursing home care, when the time comes for you to go to nursing home, despite your eligibility, if the state has run out of money, this is too bad. It is no longer an entitlement. So what we have found is that, you know, giving more flexibility to the states really is a proxy code language for making deep, deep cuts in the federal commitment to the poor.
You bring up the race issue in that answer. Want to ask you about a different topic, but where this has come up, the delay in the confirmation of Loretta Lynch. Some Republicans expressing concern, including Senator John McCain, that race is being injected into this discussion about her delay and her confirmation, saying that the Republicans' concern stems from her position on the president's executive actions on immigration and has nothing to do with race. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't want to speculate about race in this case. I do think that the Republicans are very homophobic about the immigration issue. I know that there are a lot of shenanigans around trying to make sure that there is certain abortion language inserted into legislation before they confirm Loretta Lynch. But I do think that since the election of President Obama, we have seen a very unfortunate resurgence of insecurity around race, and that would include immigrants. I think it's unfortunate because the country has come a long way with its history on race relations. And I wouldn't want to say that Loretta Lynch's nomination is totally hinged on race. She's extremely qualified. I don't think anybody is making a debate about that. But I think that the Republicans are trying to leverage other things by holding her nomination up.
Larry is in Sylva, North Carolina, line for independence. Larry, good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to ask Ms. Moore if she could possibly, when the Congress goes into session, if she could possibly put up an amendment which states that anything purchased with the taxpayers' dollars, whether it be state, local, or federal government, be manufactured here in the United States. Whether it be a company that supplies us right now, made overseas, where they would have to come over here and set up shop over here and build a plant to manufacture the stuff that we purchase with our tax dollars to be manufactured here in the United States. Thank you. I'll take that.
You know, that's a very complicated issue. There are many regulations that Democrats in particular defend regarding the percentage of a product that has to be composed of American components. But to say that it has to be 100% made in the United States is something it's probably not possible. You know, you look at the iPhones that all of us carry with us. Those components come from all over the place, Germany and components from China and Japan and other places in the world, even though Steve Jobs and Apple started here in the United States. But I do understand the thrust and the frustration that the caller brings, that it's very, very difficult to promote our economy, and and we have trade imbalances, which is why there's so much discussion and wringing of hands about the trade agreements that are currently, the TPP and other trade agreements that are being proposed now, because I think everybody realizes that trade is an essential part of a country's activity, because after all, 95% of the world's population lives outside of the United States. So we've got to have some trading partners. But I think people want to focus on what is fair trade.
Should note that on the Financial Services Committee, where you sit, you're the ranking member on monetary policy and trade, the subcommittee that handles those issues. Cindy is in Oakwood, Illinois, line for Republicans. Cindy, good morning.
Hi.
Hi,
I have
Cindy.
two questions. Number one, what is Obamacare costing the government for the next 3 years? And the second one is, what will happen when the percentage on interest goes up and we have to deal with debt we can't pay?
Okay, Cindy, I assume when you say when the percentage rate goes up, the interest rates. Janet Yellen, the chair of the Fed, has indicated that probably about the end of the year, we're going to see interest rates move up a little bit. One of the things that'll do sort of immediately is provide an incentive for people who were companies, corporations, people who were going to buy things to try to do it before the interest rates go up. So in the short term, that will create some much desperately needed investment in the United States. People who have had money sitting on the sidelines, waiting for things to happen, will provide a jump start for interest rates. I do have confidence in Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve that they will look very carefully at this before they raise the interest rates too much. The cost of the Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare, actually what we have seen is the cost of health care overall declining because of the impact of Obamacare on the market. The big fear and the big unknown comes in with regard to what the Supreme Court will do, with regard to deciding whether or not those states that didn't elect to have their own health care exchange can provide, the federal government can provide a subsidy.
Well, Congresswoman, we're going to have to end it there. I don't want to cut you off, but your colleagues are coming in, and we've got to take our viewers live to the floor of the United States House of Representatives. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
And thank you, too.
The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., March 24, 2015. I hereby appoint the Honorable Virginia Foxx to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 10 a.m. today.
Stand by for you. Another one?
A very short gaveling in by the House this morning, but we're still with Congresswoman Gwen Moore, who will be headed to the House floor later today to continue the discussion. But we've still got time to talk about the budget discussions with her, the debates that are happening this week, and some callers still waiting to talk to you as well. Christine is in Kingston, Illinois, line for Republicans. Christine, good morning.
Hi. Hi there. I'm a
Christine.
Republican. I'm thinking about becoming a former Republican because I just wondered your opinion about Scott Walker. I think it's disgusting that he is trying to fight the unions. It makes me so sad. I'm originally from Wisconsin, and my whole family is so proud of the unions and everything. And it's just a shame Scott Walker isn't, standing up for the unions. And my God, when I heard he was going to have a baseball bat in the corner of his office and he was threatening to beat up people, I can't imagine having him run as the president. I just can't. But the whole Republican view nowadays, I turned on my religious show, and they had said the end of the world was coming, and they had a picture that kind of looked like Barack Obama, and I'm just so sick of the Republicans. I think I'm going to have to go independent. But that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Well, Christine, I can tell you that I know Scott Walker very well. He ran against me when I was in the Assembly in 1990, and I was able to prevail then. But I can tell you the thing that concerns me the most about Scott Walker's politics is that I think it's easy to disagree with people. You can disagree with people, but I think, Mr. Walker is so ambitious that it concerns me that many of his policies are to appease people who can contribute to his rise in politics. And so it's really hard to have a negotiation in earnest, in a discussion with someone who is who's concerned more about their career. And that, I'm very comfortable in saying that.
We've got about 10 minutes left with Congresswoman Moore here to take your questions and comments as we're talking about the budget debate that's happening here on Capitol Hill this week. I want to ask you, you've brought up the overseas contingency operations funding, your concern with the approximately $90 billion that Republicans are looking to put into that funding to use for military spending. You've expressed concern on that. Are you concerned about the $51 billion that President Obama has proposed for that same overseas contingency operation budget?
Well, there's nothing wrong with having a contingency fund. It's important to have that for a rainy day fund for emergencies, things that may come up. We live in a very dangerous world. There are natural disasters, but what has occurred is that we've had the Budget Control Act, we've had the sequester, we have put spending caps on everything, and this is a work around those budget caps for defense spending only. And that's where the problem comes in, is that, there's no budgetary rationale for having these additional funds there. It literally is a slush fund above and beyond what the generals have projected that they will need.
Phone lines are open this morning. Democrats, Republicans, and independents. If you have questions on the budget for about the next 10 minutes or so with a senior member of the Budget Committee, Congresswoman Moore. Robert's waiting in Marion, North Carolina, line for independents. Robert, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I was wondering, before they cut anything off the budget, right, why don't they cut the subsidization out? I mean, most businesses make it without any subsidization, as in my time, right, if you didn't make it without a subsidization, you didn't make it. You went out of business.
Robert,
So
is there a specific subsidy that most concerns you?
Basically, why are they cutting, all these other things when they could cut subsidization out?
I understand your question, Robert. There's much criticism for people who need food stamps or babies that need the WIC program, and there's absolutely no criticism for the $1 trillion a year that we spend on corporate entitlements. These are entitlement programs that annually people, the gas companies and oil companies, very wealthy corporations get through the tax code. We spend $1 trillion a year, $1 trillion.
These are tax breaks that you're talking about,
these
and
are
taxes
tax
that aren't
breaks
collected.
These are revenues that we don't receive. And the budgets that the Republicans are proposing this year don't take one thin dime away from these tax expenditures. But in addition to that, it proposes to reduce taxes even further. We have seen in past budgets, almost a Xerox copy of past budgets which have proposed a 25% corporate tax rate. And so with the loss of this revenue, that puts even greater burden on poor people and the middle class, so much so that we predict that, a taxpayer making about $50,000 to $75,000 a year will see a $2,000 increase. And of course, those people who don't pay taxes because they're so poor, they'll just lose benefits like food stamps and WIC and Head Start and Pell Grants to put our kids through college. It is really a statement of priorities, and Robert is absolutely right. My major criticism of the Republican budget is they don't take one thin dime away from the wealthiest Americans. And I don't dislike rich people, but there are plenty of wealthy people like Warren Buffett and others who have said, I'm willing to do more for my country. I'm not willing to see, us divest in roads and in research and not be the greatest country in the world so that I can have an extra tax break.
From Robert to Richard in Gaithersburg, Maryland, line for Democrats. Good morning, Richard.
Yes, good morning. I have two quick comments and then a question based on those comments. Comment number one, if you look back from the Bill Clinton's budget up through everything that President Obama has done, the Republicans have been 100% wrong in all of their economic predictions and all of their economic analysis of the nation's economy. But I never, ever hear Democrats stand up on the floor of the House or the Senate and point that out. I just don't understand why Democrats don't fight back. And my next point is Ted Cruz, who is now running for president, is being accepted wholeheartedly by the birther movement. Now, the birther movement was endorsed 100% by every elected Republican official in the country, both state and federal. Okay, they claimed that President Obama wasn't born in this country, therefore he couldn't be president, and they vilified the man for 6 years. Ted Cruz's candidacy is living proof right in our faces that was all based on racism, and the Democrats are silent. They're just silent. They just always stand back and let these Republicans bully them, run over them, treat them like dogs. That's why one of the reasons the Republicans do it.
Well, Congresswoman, I'll let you respond.
Well, Richard, I think that a lot of us are really frustrated about our so-called messaging. And, it is really difficult to fight against. I think Republicans have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week opportunity to talk to folks through, Fox News and through programs like Rush Limbaugh. They're very, very well-funded venues.
Do Democrats not have those same opportunities?
24/7, I can go out of the country, and the only channel I can get maybe is CNN, but I can go anywhere in the world and get Fox. You know, they're very, very well funded venues, and a lot of people rely on them for their major source of news. I think we do try to message it. I think that Republicans have really, give them credit, they have really messaged, they have really mastered messaging negative messages. You know, for example, Barack Obama tells the story of when he was first elected to the U.S. Senate, and a baggage handler walked up to him and said, you know, Senator, I want you to do something about that death tax, which is the estate tax. And Barack Obama said to him, brother, I don't think you have to really worry about that. Here's a baggage handler worrying about the estate tax, which doesn't have any impact on him at all. I mean, that's something that only multimillionaires would be concerned. But the phraseology, something that they have mastered since their Southern strategy, has been quite masterful.
Indianapolis, Indiana is next. Tony is line for independence. Tony, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. First, just on the remarks that the representative just said, I think she forgets, and Democrats have a lot of chance to forget about the MSNBC. I think, backed by NBC, he said she can go anywhere and hear Fox. I think I can go anywhere, which I have all over the world, and the NBC's out there spouting the Democrats' lies. So let's be truthful about this. They both have networks and stuff that they rely on. But talking about the Democratic proposal for the budget, I think they're adding $6 trillion on the national debt in the next 10 years. The president you have in there now has added $6 to $8 trillion in debt. When are you people ever going to come up with the idea of stop spending so much money and save, or get where our tax money is going the right way? We just keep spending, and you say, well, we need this, we need that, we need this. When are you going to all get together and just say, let's stop spending?
Well, of course you can stop spending. I mean, I don't want to be really sarcastic with you, Tony, but this is a country, so you do spend money. You do spend money on having a military that's in place, taking care of your veterans, taking care of your elderly and your sick, building roads. So the idea of just stopping spending is a non-starter. The Republicans don't stop spending either. You mentioned that we're going to add $6 trillion over this budget window to the debt. Republicans add it too, is they use many, many tricks to hide the fact that their budget does not balance. The biggest flaw, I think, with the Republicans' budget is it's not a balanced approach. All of their cuts come from the poorest, most vulnerable, from babies, from children, from our elderly, and not one thin dime comes from those in the best position to pay for it. Inequality is very, very dangerous to our economy. The last time we had such inequality was in 1928-29, and you know what happened after that? The markets crashed. We went into the Great Depression. In 2008, when inequality was that great, we again had a financial meltdown. Inequality, as far back as in Aristotle and Plato's days, is a great problem, because when people don't have money, when you just have the very wealthy and the very poor and no middle class, it is very, very dangerous to our economy.
Congresswoman Gwen Moore is a member of the Budget Committee, Financial Services Committee. Now we'll thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
And up next, we're joined by Jeff Maurer of Platts to discuss the falling crude oil prices and what it means for the United States. We'll be right back.